How's it going? And welcome to episode 52 of On the Wire, proud member of the Pitcherless Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter at On the Wire Pod. And if you're listening on a platform that allows ratings and reviews, please take a second to let us know what you think. I am Adam Howe. You can follow me on the Twitter at 80grade. That's all spelled out. I'm once again joined by Kevin Hasting, who you should be following on the Twitter at Hasting. Kevin, so glad you could make it back from vacation just enough time to record an episode here and before you head off on another vacation. How's it going?
It's going great. I have often been a very large proponent of, if you have a significant other, whether you win your fantasy leagues or not, you spend money on them, letting them think you're winning so that you can continue to play. But what I just learned is, don't do that on a vacation in the middle of draft season. It's been very hectic over the past several days.
Yeah, I am currently in the middle of 5 drafts, all slow. Luckily, that would be awkward to be doing the live draft while recording this with everybody. But yeah, somebody in almost every draft room has commented about, oh man, I'm sorry, I'm flustered. I have 2 drafts going on at the same time. And my instinctive reaction is 2? Lucky. But that's what happens in March. You get in so many draft rooms. It's draft season, and then all of the pitcherless staff leagues are starting up. The wacky leagues that Miles Nelson puts together are starting up, all literally at the same time. I wouldn't have it any other way, and I'm glad that I finished up all my NFBC drafts.
It's good we have an extra week.
Yeah, there we go. Exactly. You get that buffer. All right. Because of that extra week, we have an extra off-season episode. As we are recording this today, we would have been talking about our first fab period, but because the season got pushed back to start April 7th, April 3rd is now going to be the first fab season on most platforms. Specifically, of course, the NFBC will be running their first fab period on that day as well. So we get extra content. And luckily, we get to bring back a large group of experts here. And yes, you guys can all argue whether or not you should be using the word expert or not. I see a lot of head shaking. That's fine. That's up to you. But you know what? People listen to you whether you like it or not. So I'm calling you guys experts. And we did this episode last year, and we're going to be doing it again right now, where we take a look at players that are going post ADP of 350, and we mock draft some actual mini teams and see where that takes us. With us today are the hosts of In the Deep, Jordan White and Christopher Weber, and then Keep or Cut, keeper-focused fantasy baseball podcast. And that is, of course, Chad Young and Pete Ball. So you should be following all of them on the Twitter. You can find links to those things in the show description. And let's just get right into it. Chris, Jordan, thanks for joining us. How you guys doing?
Hi, friends. I'm a little upset that we weren't introduced as the clear winners of last year's version of this podcast. Calling out studs like Dylan Cease, Trevor Rogers, Brandon Belt. Unbelievable. And speaking of draft season, I just had that incredibly loud air horn go off in my ears for one of my draft picks going off. So I absolutely feel that pain of being in many drafts all at once during draft season.
I was going to say, we have a podcast called In the Deep, and y'all thought you could enter into our domain and show us what's up?
No, that's why I have you guys in here. Like I said, I called you guys experts for a reason, and you have air quotes. You're causing a tornado shaking your head so fast when I mentioned that. But here you go, trying to step it up anyway. Chad, Pete, thanks for joining us, guys. How you guys doing?
Doing great. Thanks, Adam, so much for having me on, for having us on. If we're going to bring up last year, I didn't check. How did Madison Bumgarner do? I'm pretty sure I helped a lot of people out.
He was one of the many guys that I screenshotted this after we did the episode, and I think I drafted like 7 of these guys straight back to back in my Razzball. Of course, that's a cut line format, best ball format, but still, I grabbed almost all of the positive ones in that league. I ended up winning that league, so I did already give you guys a shout out privately of helping me at least win one of those leagues. Now I can do it publicly.
I don't even remember. Was there any winnings involved with that? Do we get a cut of that? For your cut? Or...
No, there were no cuts on the Razzball free league that goes on every year.
So would you say that you're going to keep it and not cut it?
Yeah. I'm going to say what I have to say that I don't have to give you any money.
Oh, okay,
is that
cool.
fine? Or...
Yeah.
All right. Like I said, we are going to do this all over again. The synopsis of the mock draft is this, is that there's 3 teams, each comprising of the co-hosts of the 3 podcasts that we have represented here tonight, with picks being alternated between the 2 hosts of their team as they come up. The rosters are made up of 1 catcher, which is different from last year. Make you guys talk about catchers. 1 middle infielder, 1 corner infielder, 1 outfielder, then 2 starting pitchers and 2 relievers. There's no bench spots. Once your team drafts a middle infielder, you can't draft another middle infielder unless they're also eligible at another free position on your roster. We're drafting this a standard 5x5 roto league in mind. This would be a fab league as well, so all these players, could and probably will be dropped at some point during the season. And we're going to be using NFBC for position eligibility, and it's current eligibility, not expected eligibility. The player pool used will be made up of players that had an ADP of 350 or later in recent draft champions drafts between March 1st and March 16th. So we all have the pool in front of us. We all know what the pool is. It's not going to change for this mock. And so those are the rules. I want to get right into it and just get started on the first pick. And the first pick went to Chad Young of Keeper Cut. And Chad, you went with the position that we didn't have to talk about last year. Talk to me about the catcher that you ended up going with.
Yeah, part of the reason we decided to go with catcher first is if you look at the catchers who are available post 350, which we're about to do, it's not pretty. There aren't a lot of good choices. And there was one that stood out to me, and I was like, look, middle infield, we don't get our first choice. A pitcher, we don't get our first choice. We'll find other guys, but this is it at catcher. When I'm drafting this late in a deep league, I'm usually looking for someone who I think can potentially be a game changer for the league, right? Sometimes I'm trying to draft just some stats that'll help in the short term, but in general, I'm thinking, guy I picked this late, I'm probably not going to keep anyways. So all I want to know is, can I get somebody who, if everything breaks right, can swing a league? MJ Melendez is exactly that kind of guy. Melendez is a catcher in the Royals system, has had raw power for a long time. If you read old scouting reports on him, it talks about his raw power. It didn't really play out. Struggled a little bit in high A in 2019, didn't play in 2020 with the weird year. And then last year across AA and AAA, hit 41 home runs. His bat has broken out to the point that Kansas City is now, they're very happy. They say they're very happy with his catching ability. They are moving him all over the diamond. He's basically looking at all the corners just because they want to try to find ways to get his bat into the lineup. So now you're talking about a catcher with 40 home run power who might be an everyday player at other positions while still being a backup catcher, so that he maintains catcher eligibility into the future. That's a no-brainer for me. Honestly, I don't think his ADP should be this late. I get, we come from the keeper show, so I always think keepers, but especially in redraft, I get that we don't know when he'll be up, what his timeline is. The Royals have been aggressive in the past. I think they're going to be aggressive again, and if he's up early and you can slot him into your catcher spot, he's got huge potential.
Yeah, I think I brought up MJ Melendez on this pod multiple times, and I'm gonna turn this over to Kevin real quick before we move on to the next player. And I want to give Kevin another opportunity to throw any cold water onto the idea that MJ Melendez will be up early on in the season and be playing regularly. Of course, as our house Royals expert here, he has a little bit, as Kevin always say, you watch every game of the Royals and probably the AL Central as well. So are you still throwing the same cold water on Melendez talk? And I've tried not to bring him up in the last couple episodes for this reason, but I haven't stopped drafting him behind your back. And so Kevin, how much cold water are you still throwing on him?
Unfortunately, I still don't see him with the Kansas City team for quite some time. It's crowded, even if he moves around. Of course, there's injuries can happen, but it's going to take multiple injuries. They have right now with Whit Merrifield moving to right field. They have 2 MLB ready utility outfielders in both Kyle Isbell and everybody's favorite joke when he would get sent up and down in
Frequent flyer.
Frequent flyer, Edward Olivares. So they got them. They have both Hunter Dozier and Carlos Santana swapping in and out at DH and first base. Nick Prado's in line to come. Some like Vinny Pasquantino, even better than Nick Prado, and he may beat him to the big leagues if Dozier or Carlos Santana has issues. Whit Merrifield can always move back to the infield if there's the Mondesi injury that everybody expects come in. So there's just so many things need to happen before we see MJ Melendez, unfortunately.
Now, I think with the same goes with a couple other players that we're going to talk about. Something to also keep in mind that these ADP that we're looking at with Melendez and a lot of the other rookies or prospects that we might be drafting, their ADP tends to be a lot higher in a draft champions or a draft and hold format, which is what we were using for the category here. And if you look at the online championships, which are 12-team fab leagues on the same platform, Melendez still over 350, still would have qualified, but a good 30 points lower or higher or earlier than you see in these draft and holds. Something also to keep in mind that a lot of these prospects do get pushed up in formats where you can, make your drops and take your losses, and as opposed to those 50 rounders where you're stuck with those players the whole season.
I forgot the caveat that I've said every time we've talked about this, almost every episode this offseason. I hope I'm wrong, because if I'm wrong, he played his way in, and that would be a great thing for the Royals.
All right, the next pick went to me, and I ended up going with a relief pitcher to start us off. There's a pretty common strategy for a lot of people to go with their end game picks at the end of their Fab League drafts, and especially in early March or like late February, early March, before training has really got ramped up and you don't know what the rules are going to be. This is your time to take your darts, and especially in the closer situation, especially with the closer market that we're seeing today. So I'm looking forward to, Jordan and Chris, you guys are talking about doing your relief pitcher, your late relief pitcher episode on In the Deep coming up. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say, what the market looks like on that, along with catcher. But I ended up going with Art Warren of the Cincinnati Reds. And really that I'm going to assume that we're going to start seeing Art Warren move up draft boards as we're going on, just because David Bell has already said that he would prefer to have one person that he can rely on. And he doesn't have any of them anymore. Any of those options that you might have thought would have been those options, whether it be Lucas Sims being behind schedule or Amir Garrett being traded to the Royals and TJ Antone not being able to pitch. And so Art Warrens does seem like one of the top candidates in that bullpen to, as long as he continues to have, or he has a good or a decent spring to make a name for himself more so than others might have. He would be the one that, with the strikeout potential, with being a right-handed pitcher and just being in the position to take that job and run with it, even if it's just for the first month or two of the season, staves matter. So I almost prefer that. If I'm going to take a dart on somebody and they get the job right away and they lose it, it's better than trying to throw a dart and then having that bullpen situation continue to stay murky for the first month or two. Have any of you guys seen a situation or in Cincinnati that would deter you from Art Warren being the clear favorite to take over that position?
So I can basically guarantee that we will be talking about Art Warren come this Friday when we do our relief pitcher episode. Because have you seen what Roster Resource says about the Cincinnati bullpen right now? It's got 4 different pitchers listed as their closer, none of whom are good options based on history. Art Warren is really promising because, and even him, he's only got 26.1 career innings, but the 21 innings that he threw last year were wildly impressive with 14.5 Ks per 9. So he seems to have the best closer stuff, quotes, air quotes there. But he did really impress in a couple of months last year. So that's who I would go with. That seems to make the most sense.
Yeah, I think that we're definitely going to talk about him on our episode of In the Deep. I got to say, though, I was watching the Reds game yesterday because they did have it televised. And I got to watch Art Warren pitch, and he did not inspire a lot of confidence for me. He gave up 2 hits and walked 1 batter and still somehow got out of the inning unscathed. He had 2 strikeouts, great, obviously. So like still an inning pitch, no earned runs, but had very little command of his breaking ball, which I'm not going to put too much stock into one outing in spring training, but just like anecdotally watching that didn't really inspire a lot of confidence. But as far as options go in that Reds bullpen, it's pretty thin. So I think that he's probably my favorite pick out of that bunch.
Yeah. Jordan, when did he come into the game? Do you remember?
He would have pitched in the 7th inning, 6th or 7th inning.
That's better than if he came into the 9th. Like, you don't typically see your promising closer coming in at the end of a spring training game. Usually they are coming in the middle of a game, or they're coming in to face like the heart of the lineup to make sure they can get their reps in against quality opponents. So it's nice to see him come in the 7th rather than the 9th. I would have rather seen him come in like the 4th or 5th, like right after whoever the starter was, or the first 2 starters. But 7th is still better than the end game in spring training.
He actually pitched the 6th. I just looked it up.
Even better.
So,
yes. Especially this early. Yeah, we get towards here in another couple of weeks. You're going to want to see him in right after the starter. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's worth mentioning that he threw his slider 60% of the time, and that pitch had a 46.6 whiff percentage. It's a silly slider. It allowed
is that good?
That's good. That's pretty good. It allowed a 123 WOBA. That's not a number you usually see for WOBA. That's very low. And he pairs it with 95 mile an hour heat. So he does have that, again, air quotes, closer stuff.
Yeah, and in the right situation, like because of the strikeout potential, he's still going to be a reliever that is going to not hurt you in most formats. So if he's not getting the save opportunities right away, as long as he's not, walking every other batter that's coming in and putting them on and then letting up a home run and then being chased away from the game, which is going to be a possibility, he's still going to at least get you the strikeouts and put you in a position to at least add up those counting stats. All right, Jordan, we move on to you for the 3rd pick of this little mock draft. And you also went relief pitcher, but which direction did you end up going in?
So I went with someone who was an in the deep favorite last year as well, Anthony Bender, ADP of 358. So we barely squeaked into our uprights here that we set up for ourselves. I think Bender is far and away the best pitcher in the Marlins organization, in the bullpen, excuse me. I was going to say, if comparing him to any of that starting rotation is a little bit silly, but he did notch spring training save. And I know we just talked about how you would rather have your relievers coming in earlier in the games to face better hitters than later in the games, but he did not just save the other day. He was sitting 98 to 99 the entire time he was out there. And then his slider carried a 71% CSW through his outing, and he struck out the side. Really encouraging stuff. And it's the same story as last year when he had a 42.4% CSW over 61 plus innings of work. So just continuing what he was doing last year, which is really encouraging. The big downside is that Don Mattingly is someone who prefers experience more than just like stuff or skill when it comes to choosing his closer. So right now it looks like Dylan Floro will probably be the favorite out of the gate to get the saves. But I really think that Anthony Bender is just a better pitcher and eventually will take that role from him. On top of that, Juan Paez from Fish Stripes, that's the SB Nation Marlins blog, pointed out that Floro is not very good in save situations. He had an ERA of over 5.5 last year in save situations, which is not great.
I thought you were just going to stop.
Yeah, I might edit that out.
He's not very good.
Period. I was like,
I have to provide evidence. But yeah, he walked more hitters in those high leverage situations. His whip was much higher. K/9 dropped as well. That's a huge yikes for me. I can't say that I am interested in taking Dylan Floro there. So I would much rather have Anthony Bender. So definitely give me him.
I like the call out of Bender. He's the situation in Miami. Even though, Chris, you referenced roster resources, Cincinnati bullpen having 4 different closer designations, and we're going to get to one a little bit later on in the podcast with even more. But they're pretty confident. Jason Martinez over there is pretty confident that Floro is the closer there. He's the only one with the designation. But Bender was always in talks last year as everybody's favorite to take over the role. I know I picked him up in a bunch of places throughout the course of the season. He just was never placed in that role. And I guess I worry that to your point, Jordan, that he won't be given that chance, no matter how good he is, no matter what numbers he puts up, that he's become, quote, more valuable in a, fireman type of role, or like just the one you want out there for the matchups and to get that strikeout that you need rather than necessarily the end game. And I do believe Mattingly's the type of guy who wants to have one guy that he can rely on at the end of a game, regardless of how well any one particular one is doing. But I completely agree with you that he's the best pitcher in that bullpen.
The challenge for Bender is I don't think he can win the job. He needs Floro to lose it. I think there's literally nothing Bender can do. If Floro takes the ninth and is fine, he doesn't have to be good even. He just has to be fine.
Better than Anthony Bass.
What?
He just needs to be better than Anthony Bass was last year.
Yeah, basically. Like, that's it. All he has to do is convert saves, even if they're unimpressive, even if there's no strikeouts, even if they're always a tightrope. If he's converting, Bender could go out and strike out the first 50 guys he faces, and he's not going to move up because they're not going to move Floro out of that role until Floro loses it, is my takeaway. That's where he differs from Sims is that I think, or not Sims, sorry. Where he differs from Warren is that whoever starts off in Cincinnati is not going to have a very firm grip on that role, and somebody else could actually take it. Warren could outperform even a decent closer and end up taking that job. I don't think Bender has that same path forward. He needs Floro to falter, which I think he will. I don't think Floro is that good. So I don't think it, but it is one of the differences there is that to me is not wide open. It's Floro's job until he blows it.
And that's particularly troublesome because the Marlins as a team last year only had 33 saves. So the longer Floro holds on to that role, the less and less obviously chances Bender's going to have. So I just figured while Keeper Cut is piling on this pick, I'd twist the knife there.
So I will say, though, just to rebut on that, is that their offense was not as good as it looks like it's going to be this year, at least on paper. Like, they got Avisaíl Garcia added to that offense. They got Jorge Soler there now. So I think they're going to be in more, they're going to have more leads, I would hope, this year with a slightly better offense. So hopefully there are more opportunities to convert those saves. But I definitely agree with you that the small amount of saves that they had last year were concerning. So.
But to be fair, at this point in the draft, what are we hoping for? Like 40 saves here? Any saves are gravy.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing too, is if I can get, even if Bender just throughout the year accrues 8 to 10 saves and then is still putting up great numbers elsewhere and not hurting me, I think that's the biggest thing, because that's what you're looking for this late in a draft, is someone who's not going to kill you in other areas while contributing incrementally.
All right, I think that's enough talking down to Jordan's pick here, so we'll move on to the next one. And we go to your partner, Chris. You got the 4th overall pick here. You decided to fill out some more of the into deep pitching roster, but going starters. Talk to me about your pick here.
Yeah, I have some grievances first. I feel like MJ Melendez comes up, everyone's all, yeah, Melendez. And then everyone's talking up Art Warren. And then, yeah, I feel like you're coming at the champs here, and I don't like it.
Let's see how this pick goes.
I need to defend my boy. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It comes from a place of insecurity. It's all right.
So actually, the only reason I took Carlos Hernandez of the Kansas City Royals here is because in a previous mock draft with pitcher list, Kevin Hastings sniped me on Carlos Hernandez, and I just needed some payback is what it is. I don't really know anything about him or who he is.
I say that mock draft was 4 months ago. You're really holding on to that, huh?
People don't forget. No, I'm actually a very big Carlos Hernandez stan. He's a very, maybe the most mentioned pitcher of In the Deep last year, because I tallied it up and we've talked about him on at least 7 of our 40 some odd episodes, because all throughout the second half of last season, he was throwing up zeros and just stayed rostered in very few leagues. Talking about him over and over again has led me to looking into him a lot. And I'm a fan. Now, if you look at his numbers, just his numbers there, you're not going to probably come away overly impressed. You're probably going to look at this and see, I don't know, he's high velocity. I don't want to say Kyle Hendricks, because Kyle Hendricks doesn't walk anybody and Carlos Hernandez does, but he's a sinker baller. It's what he is. And he doesn't miss a ton of bats at this point, but the arm that he has is just absolutely electric. He throws one of the highest velocity sinkers in all of baseball. His changeup, he kills all of the spin on his changeup. And it's just such a rare thing to both have such a high velocity, high spin fastball, and then just deaden the ball completely for the changeup to create a lot of vertical break on it. And he pairs it with a good curveball and a very bad very bad slider. One of the things that I talked about when I mentioned him in our starting pitching episode was that I feel like he needs to ditch the slider or change the slider, the shape of it, or maybe make it a cutter instead or something, just something to get that horizontal glove side movement. But I digress. The thing here that I really like is just the arm talent. I think he's got a floor of just being terrible, just walking the ballpark. But I think there's like a midpoint where he's just a very productive, innings eating ground ball pitcher that just puts up a lot of like quality starts. But the upside, if he can figure out one breaking pitch that gets swings and misses in important counts, I think there's actually like strikeout per inning upside here. And if he can unlock that, he would rocket up draft boards for next season.
Again, I will push it back over to our expert Royals take as the one who was sniped and who vocally said so in our chat that he was not happy about this pick.
Nothing better. There's nothing better.
The question I have for you, Kevin, is that how much of an impact do you think Zach Greinke is going to have on the entire rotation? Never mind Carlos Hernandez, but we'll specifically talk about Carlos Hernandez here. And is there any chance that Hernandez is even fighting off any of the other young? Because the entire rotation beyond Greinke is very young and moving on up. Is he have a firm hold on his rotation spot, do you think?
Yeah, I think Hernandez is penciled in and has to lose the spot during spring training. Greinke's just taking Mike Minor's spot. So not much has changed from a couple weeks ago as far as the rest of the rotation. And yeah, to the point about numbers not looking great, when you watch Carlos Hernandez pitch, he looks filthy and the hitters do not look comfortable. And it's like when you were talking with Eno last week, Adam, guys that have so many multiple pitches, if just one of them gets a little better, it doesn't even have to be the slider that's bad. Just one of them gets a little better and the production can skyrocket up from a guy like this.
It could be he has a very good curveball. It could be as simple as just changing up the pitch mix, using the curveball and the changeup more and just axing the slider. It could even just come from that.
Yeah, it is nice to see him utilize all three of these pitches. I'm looking at his player page over at Pitcher List right now. Is of course he's got the 5 pitches that are all not even. Obviously, he leans on the 4-seamer over 30% of the time, but between the sinker, curveball, slider, and changeup, all within 10 points of each other in usage. So he's not, afraid to mix it up and throw what he needs to in any certain situation that's necessary.
He's got a very fun thing going on where if you look at Baseball Savant, Pitcher List, and Alex Chamberlain's pitch leaderboard, you will see 3 different distributions for his 4-seamer and sinker. No one knows how to classify these pitches. It drives me nuts.
That is crazy. I did enough of the GIFs over the off season for the new site, and it is pretty funny to see like the differences in classifications for certain pitches on certain pitchers, and just not having any understanding of which this is nothing. This is not that pitch.
Hey, Alex Fast here, and thanks for listening to this podcast on the Pitcher List Podcast Network. If you're a fan, consider supporting all of us by getting a PL Plus subscription, where you're going to get an ad-free website and get access to our Discord, where you can talk to all of our podcast hosts and staff. Plus, you can hang out with our incredible Pitcher List community. It's basically a baseball sanctuary year-round for as low as $8 a month. You can sign up at pitcherlist.com/plus, and you're going to get your first month free with promo code podcast. Also, don't forget to check out everything else we do as well, from YouTube videos, live streams, newsletters, off-season articles, TikToks, breakdowns, over 15 baseball podcasts on our network. We can't stop talking about baseball even during the off-season. So sign up for PL Plus today at pitcherlist.com/plus and use promo code podcast to get your first month free. All right. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the show.
All right, we'll stick with Kevin here and move on to the 5th pick overall. Kevin, you're representing us here on The Wire. So who'd you stick in our outfield?
Since I was on tilt after the sniping of Carlos Hernandez, I went with another Royal here. Somebody that I've considered throughout the offseason when we're talking about guys in this range of drafts, but old and boring, very old and boring going here with Michael A. Taylor, center fielder for the Royals. But it's the thing that draws me to him for this point in a draft. Typically, this is somebody I would just keep an eye on the waiver wire. If I have an injury, he's going to be there. He's going to be available in plenty of leagues if you need to go to somebody like this. But Kansas City has a full 7-game week in the first full week of the season. So this is a guy that if I have outfielders on other teams that only have a 5 or even 6-game week, that I may draft him with my last pick, just planning on using him for that 1 week, see how it goes. His batting average is going to hurt you a little bit. Hopefully not too much. Maybe that 240 range is where most of the projections got him. But this is a guy that every projection system has him doing exactly what he did last year: double-digit home runs and double-digit stolen bases. So it's a guy you can throw out there for half a week in FBC format or a full week in other formats, and you're probably getting something from him for a guy that's going to be available on a lot of waiver wires for most of the season.
I know he was on and off at least one of my teams last year, just because he went through all these streaks where, like, oh, okay, the Royals found something in Michael A. Taylor that the Nationals just couldn't find or whatever. But then you realized, oh no, this is Michael A. Taylor. He's not going to be productive. He's not going to be productive for me. I'm going to do exactly what you said. I'm going to put him back in the wire because I know he's going to stay there, simmer there. And if you see him doing anything, then maybe I'll bring him back up. But I think this goes to your initial point, is that he's going to play. Like, he's going to be in the lineup almost every day, playing center field for the Royals. And that's worth something at the very least. The knowledge that he's going to be out there and he's going to be producing something. He might not always be good, like you said, in the average department, but he will be a body that's going up to the plate and at least giving it his all, and not because he's going to be in a platoon and not because he's going to have certain situations. He's going to be somebody that is going to, at least give you an opportunity to put up some kind of stats, especially after getting paid by the Royals.
And with stolen bases at such a premium, the fact that he wasn't as efficient last year, but this is the team that loves to run. And this is a guy who can chip in, as we saw last year, like 14 stolen bases. That's important. That's significant. So for that to be going so late and the guaranteed plate appearances, I think you've convinced me to move him up my draft boards, because I'm not good at drafting stolen bases.
The one guy that I thought was going to get drafted here, especially if anybody by you, Pete, as you talked about it earlier in the offseason, was that Jorge Mateo, who's outfield eligible in NFBC. If you're going to draft for the stolen bases, he was the one that I expected somebody to pick up in the draft, and nobody did. I wasn't allowed to, since Kevin already picked up our outfielder for our roster. But that's somebody who, as I said earlier, we're not allowed to draft based on what we think they're going to have. And I'm pretty confident that Jorge Mateo is not going to be an outfielder for Baltimore next year. And if he wins any kind of role, it'll be somewhere in the middle infield. And so it'd be nice to have that flexibility. But if he wins a job, Mateo's the stolen base choice in this range, in my mind. All right, Pete, we'll stick with you then. And you got the first of 2 keeper cut picks here at pick 6 overall. And you stayed in the outfield as well. Tell everybody who you went with.
Yeah, so I went with Nick Senzel, and it was between Senzel and Mateo, but I can't quit Nick Senzel, which doesn't really make for a great conversation, because there's literally like nothing. There's no stats to really analyze from last year, because he only played a handful of games, but everybody knows the potential that he has, the impact he made when he was originally called up a few years ago. he has that 20/20 ability. And I've been reading quotes from him this offseason, and it seems like his head's in the right place. This is going to sound stupid, but he said his goal is to play 140, 150 games and to stay healthy, that's a good goal, man. I'm really happy that's your goal, but it's one thing to say that. Obviously, it's another thing to actually follow up and do it. But if you look at what was holding him back, like, it's been a bunch of different things really since he was in the minor leagues. But it was the knee last year, and he had cartilage that was messed up, and I can't imagine it's comfortable to play with that. He had the surgery, and then fluid built up, and apparently wasn't on the same page with the Reds as to his rehab plan, and he ended up basically missing the rest of the year after that point. So I don't put a lot of stock into the fact that he wasn't all that productive before he went down for that surgery. So if we're willing to write off all of last year, look at him holistically, still just 27 years old, guaranteed play time this year in a great ballpark to play in. The lineup's not as good as it was, but I don't care. I just want Nick Senzel to be in there. I like him this year. I still can't quit him. If he doesn't stay healthy this year, then I'll be out. But this year, I got to be in.
Chad, was this a position or a pick that you guys actually conversed with, or did you just let Pete make the pick for you guys? And what do you feel about it?
We work as a team, so we conversed on all of our picks. But this, in general, we conversed on our picks and then let whoever's pick it was just make the final call. But this was, I didn't need to be convinced here. And I think what Pete said is right. It's hard to look. Like, you can't look at what he did last year and be like, oh, here's the signs that he's going to break out. This is purely a post hype at this point, maybe. A case where there's lots of reasons to be pessimistic. There are lots of reasons why he's going so late in drafts, despite having a clear role at this point. But the pedigree is so good. And there's such talent there. And like, I'm looking right now, and Roster Resource has him hitting 9th. As Pete said, this is not a particularly strong Reds lineup, at least compared to what it's been the last couple of years. But I just don't care, because if Senzel is healthy and performing the way Senzel is capable of performing, if that pedigree shines through, I just don't care who's around him in the lineup, where he's hitting in the order. First of all, he'll move up if that happens. But second of all, he's talented enough to make that not matter. So I think at this point in the draft, like, goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, that you either need to find someone like Taylor, who's going to give you numbers and you can just count on those numbers and they're not special, but they'll be there, or go get somebody who could swing the league for you. Go get someone who could completely change the shape of your team. And Senzel has the capability of doing that.
Yeah, not only do they have him, of course, in at the 9 spot on Roster Resource, but of course they've got him at the everyday center fielder in Cincinnati. I wonder if Senzel, with his injury history, granted they haven't really been associated, but if center field is really the best position for him. Obviously, he came up as a middle infielder, shortstop, third baseman, all over the place, and then they forced him out into the outfield. And he's not a bad center fielder defensively. He's very athletic. But I wonder if moving him out of that position in the field, where he's going to get a lot more action, he's going to put himself in harm's way, like a Byron Buxton type of situation, it would be more beneficial to keeping him moving and keeping him healthy. And third base, it looks like it's opening up. Mike Moustakas getting hurt today in spring training. Who's to say that wouldn't be an even better situation for him? I'm not sure. But I agree with you, Chad, that just seeing him at the bottom of that lineup on Roster Resource doesn't really mean much, because if he is healthy and he is producing, that won't stay. That's not set in stone for sure.
He was asked about the position thing, and he said anytime you can constantly play a position, you'll feel more comfortable. He's excited to play center field. He said it feels like home for him. So after those are like pretty strong comments, and for a guy who's obviously not been able to stay on the field, if he says he's comfortable there and it feels like home, then I hope they don't move him. But I shared the same concerns, Adam. It's like, oh, of all places to be in the field, and you just got the DH, let the kid get his feet under him. But I get it. If he feels at home in center field, I say let him play it.
No, we said it a couple of weeks ago. If they don't give the DH to Mike Moustakas, a somewhat healthy Mike Moustakas, I think that they're not making the right moves there. Moustakas needs a DH spot in Cincinnati. But yeah, I think where a lot of National League teams are going to utilize that DH spot as a rotation of either off injured players or players that need a rest and what have you, and not necessarily pick the David Ortiz type of DH for this coming year. But we'll see how they all end up using it. Obviously the Nationals will be doing that, but I don't think majority of teams will be doing that, taking that route. All right, so like I said, keeper cut, you guys have back-to-back picks here. on the turn of this 3-team draft. So, Chad, you're up here. Tell us about the direction you end up going.
Yeah, I went with our corner infield pick, and I took J.D. Davis. So since Davis went to the Mets, so he moved to the Mets before the 2019 season. Since then, 3 seasons, it's of part-time duty. He's got 893 plate appearances. He has a 130 WRC plus as a Met. Every time they put him in the lineup, he mashes the ball. And then they don't leave him in the lineup because they don't really have a spot for him. Now they have a DH spot, but they also have Robinson Cano showing up again, and they've got a bunch of other concerns. And so I look at roster resource, and right now they have Davis as the small side of a platoon with Robinson Cano. I am dubious of almost 40-year-old Robinson Cano returning from having not played in forever and being a useful member of that team. I also think the Mets may not be done making moves, and I think J.D. Davis is a potential trade candidate. If J.D. Davis gets an everyday job, which he should get, he deserves to get, I think he has potential to be a difference-making bat for them and for fantasy teams. It almost doesn't matter what format you play. Like over those 3 years with the Mets, he has a 288 average and a 373 on base percentage. So he's going to help you out a lot in both of those categories. He's got 33 home runs and 893 plate appearances, which is not great, but I think it could be better with regular playing time. Like he has the power to be a 30 home run hitter. Maybe 20 to 25 is a better bet. But again, you're talking about a guy you're taking around pick 400 or something like that. I'm not going to be too picky about it. But I think for him, like if the Mets offseason had gone differently and he was either traded somewhere where he had a clear job or they had announced that he was their starting third baseman, starting DH, whatever it is, his ADP would be much higher. I'll gamble on that happening sometime soon and creating that value.
Chris, I don't know if excited's the right word, but how interested are you as a Mets fan about J.D. Davis?
J.D. Davis is another name that gets mentioned a lot around in the deep, but for different reasons than Carlos Hernandez. It's because I got absolutely walloped in a board bet where I took J.D. Davis and Jordan took Austin Riley last year. That did not go great for me. But I still really like J.D. Davis for a lot of the reasons that Chad mentioned.
More than Austin Riley?
So I'm a very big Mets fan. I pay very close attention to the team. And I just looked at J.D. Davis's Fangraphs page and I saw that he hit 285 and I went, really?
Okay.
Because I had it in my head that he had such an underwhelming year, but it was really just the power because he was dealing with a wrist injury, and it's a very common thing spread around baseball. Wrist and hand injuries mean decreased power. And if we take that as gospel, then we can hope with some evidence that his power will return. That's what I'm banking on. That's what I'm hoping for. And that would mean that the playing time is the only question. And unfortunately, I have absolutely no idea how this is going to play out. Robbie Cano might tear his hamstring tomorrow and be out for 4 months. He had 3 hamstring injuries that took him out for a significant amount of time the last time he played. And you guys may have heard he did not play all of last year. So really, honest, I have absolutely no idea how this bench and DH situation is going to play out for the Mets. I probably would not draft J.D. Davis right now, but the second I see he's getting anything resembling regular at-bats, I am grabbing him off the waiver wire.
So this dude's stat line just gets weirder and weirder. I'm like crazy worlds here. Like how many players, here's how many players had a strikeout percentage of at least 32.2%, but had an on-base percentage over 380. The list is J.D. Davis. What the heck is that?
Very elite company of his own company.
If that's what you want to call it. I don't like, it's like a weird brag. Like I had that OBP and I struck out 32% of the time.
He had a 426 BABIP last year. So he BABIP'd his way to that on base last year. If you look over the 3-year stretch, he still has a 360 BABIP over those 3 years, but you're starting to get that over a longer period of time where it's maybe indicative of a player who will run high BABIPs, which I think he is. But he had a 24.7% strikeout rate over that 3-year period. I think the wrist injury that Schwebsy mentioned, I think is an influence last year in both the power and potentially in the strikeouts. And that they may be related, right? The lack of power allows pitchers to challenge him more, which then leads to more strikeouts and resulted in him relying on that BABIP to put up the line that he did. But his greater body of work suggests that he can control those strikeouts, hit for more power, and still put up that overall line without relying on a 426 BABIP, which is not going to happen again, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't have any exposure to JD Davis this year, and it's mostly just because I think I half jokingly, or maybe even just a quarter jokingly, mentioned in one of our first episodes of the offseason that I was basically just staying away from Mets players almost in general due to the injury, how they've handled injuries, at least publicly, over the course of the last year and a half, 2 years. And I famously said that Starling Marte is not somebody I'm targeting if he goes to the Mets. And then a week later, he signed with the Mets, and I have not drafted him ever since. And JD Davis, between JD Davis and all the competition that he does have on that roster, granted, it was mentioned that he'll be getting the majority of his playing time at third base rather than the outfield, so it's not really, the competition is not there where it is. I still worry about how much of a, maybe not strict platoon, but how much of that playing time that Chris, you were talking about, will end up being there.
Around the Pitcher List Discord, we have an emote that we use that is of my face with the word pain superimposed over it. I've been making that face for a while now.
Yeah. You're saying the same trainers that the Mets are, obviously, and that pain just doesn't go away. All right, we'll move on to my pick, the 8th pick overall here, and I decided to fill up my our middle infielder, and this is a guy I've been getting a lot more as of recent drafts. I wish I took the chance on him in my November drafts, but I'm happy to have the exposure I have now. I just picked him a lot earlier in the keeper league. Now I'm with you guys, and also one of my dollar day picks in my Otnu draft that happened over the weekend his way, and that's Jeremy Peña, the probable starting shortstop for the Houston Astros after not signing Carlos Correa back, not grabbing any of the other top tier shortstops. And this is a guy that, from everything I understand, the Astros are very high on, and they're perfectly happy with him winning that job and kind of running with it. And I think it's something that Kevin and I have said all last year. Anytime you can get a piece of the Astros lineup, you at least want to consider it. And if you're going to get an everyday positional player like Peña at ADP currently at 435, which will definitely go up as spring training goes on, unless he completely loses the job in that scenario, then you should be doing this, especially in the middle infield, as we talked off air earlier in the episode, before the episode. It's not pretty later on in late drafts. So I just want to throw this out here as well. We talk about projections a lot, and I think one of the projections that doesn't get utilized as often maybe as it could or should is that the Steamer 600 projections. So all these are the projections that take the Steamer projections and they elongate them out to 600 plate appearances, as if every player is going to get 600 plate appearances, which obviously is not going to happen. But it represents what the talent level is and what they expect them to do in production in general. So his Steamer 600, which if he is the everyday shortstop for the Astros, is in the cards for sure. His defense is stellar. He can stay on the field. His 72 runs, 22 home runs, 74 RBI. So 77 there with an extra 12 stolen bases. So he's hitting that double-digit stolen bases. Great 245 average, not that great. 6.5 walk rate, 23.5 K rate. Not stellar, but for a rookie, that's pretty good. I'm going to give you guys another Steamer 600 projection for another rookie shortstop eligible player. And it's right around 74 runs, 80 RBIs, which is a little bit more in each category, 25 home runs, only 3 more home runs there, 16 stolen bases compared to 12, and a 256 average. Same strikeout rate, basically the same walk rate as well at 7%. And that's Bobby Witt Jr. And obviously he's being drafted within the top 100 in a lot of different drafts. And I made this mistake as I was hosting the Tout Wars head-to-head draft. And I somehow blurted out that Ronald Acuna and Brendan Rodgers were the same player. Hopefully nobody actually took that seriously. I love the faces that I'm seeing. I really appreciate that. I'm not saying that Bobby Witt Jr. and Jeremy Peña are the same player, but it goes to show the type of talent that Peña has that I just don't think a lot of people were seeing because he didn't have a clear role going into the offseason. This is the guy who could definitely run with that job, especially with the defense that he puts out there, which I know the Astros really appreciate, and he could continue to roll with that.
So something that I have to ask, I can't remember, because a little peek behind the curtain for everyone that's listening. We do this like in an Excel spreadsheet over the course of a few days. Is how we did this, kind of pinging each other when we're going to make our picks. Did you make this pick before or after they announced that Correa was going to the Twins?
That's a good question.
90% sure it was before.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought it was like last Thursday is when you did it. And the news broke on Friday when Schwebzy and I were recording In the Deep.
Yeah, so that felt pretty good.
Better lucky than good. Lucky than good.
I have a little bit of exposure to Peña in about a third of the leagues that I've drafted so far. And that's not including the two that I'm currently drafting that I just mentioned. So this is somebody that I was willing to take a risk on in a couple of different draft and holds. And I think I have him in one or two fab leagues as well.
You did. You made the pick on the 17th, which was Thursday.
Nice.
Yep. Which was the day before the signing. Yeah.
Hey, Adam, who's your source?
Most of my source comes from Zimmerman's Mining the News, so that's something that everybody I'm sure is reading.
It's weird though, because I'm reading the message that says Jeremy Peña starting shortstop for the Houston Astros. Trust me, this is coming. I don't know.
Given the landscape of middle infielders, this is maybe the one pick I was most upset about in this draft.
Thank you. Yeah.
That is a compliment. That is definitely a compliment. Just so we're clear, that's how Schwebzy shows that he's okay. Yeah, nice job.
No, this is the type of player that if you're getting somebody who's like a starting shortstop, and we talked about this earlier in the offseason, shortstop is extremely deep early on in your drafts. And I've heard you guys say this as well on In the Deep. But the problem is that there's too many. They're all good. They're all good and they're all being drafted. And so you're not going to have a really easy time finding a good shortstop on the wire in general. So if you're able to fill your middle infield spot or get another starting shortstop on your bench to fill in for injuries or to fill in for mishaps or what have you, this should definitely be a consideration of yours in the end game of your draft, regardless of league size, in my opinion.
I just had one of those moments like when you're watching a movie and they say the title of the movie in the movie. It's like, oh, so you said the thing.
The titular line. Yeah. All right. Let's move it on to you guys that are In the Deep. Jordan, you had the next pick, the 9th pick overall. You ended up filling in your corner infielder with somebody who just got locked up for, at least an extra year of control. Talk to us about why you went with your pick here.
So I did some more In the Deep love here. Someone we talked about a couple different times last year, along with his other fellow first baseman for the Giants. I talked about Darin Ruff here. So his ADP is at 389 right now. Ruff, while he's only projected for about 350 plate appearances or so this year, I cheated, and I know this is a fab league and fab only runs weekly, but I was like, maybe it's a daily moves league and you can actually take advantage of the platoon splits a little bit. So I cheesed it with my pick here a little bit. On a per plate appearance measure, Darin Ruff has just as good of or better outcomes than pretty much anyone in the league. He puts up a result of hard contact or a walk in almost 50% of his plate appearances, which is way higher than league average. And I want to shout out Alexander Chase from Dugout Study Hall. He's got some really cool hitter and pitcher pie charts that he has on his Tableau that you can check out that kind of show this and illustrate it in a nice digestible way. He's just very good as a hitter in terms of hitting the ball very hard. He's got like a nearly 50% hard hit rate, which is darn near elite. So like I said, he's currently slated to be platooned according to Roster Resource, but he hit over 260 from both sides of the plate last year. And I'm almost wondering if the DH benefits him and if they're going to keep him in the lineup more and if he'll actually beat his plate appearance projections. I am curious about that. I think that they would be, the Giants, that is, better served if they had Ruff in the lineup more often and had his bat there because he just rakes. But yeah, that's really most of what it is. It's just a matter of if he gets the plate appearances, I think he's going to be an absolute monster.
The Jock Peterson signing has really thrown a lot of Giants stuff into disarray. We were we're a lot less confident than we were a couple weeks ago about picking Giants players and suggesting Giants players.
Yeah, that is the big question mark.
I was really surprised to see Pearson go to the Giants, because when he signed with the Cubs last year, it was very clear that he chose to sign with the Cubs because he was going to get everyday playing time. It's something that the Dodgers never really did with him, and for good reason. And when he moved over, to Atlanta, you saw more of that, the platooning happening a little bit more. And to see him signing in San Francisco, you realize he probably doesn't care anymore, because it's all but a guarantee that he'll go back into a platoon situation with all the platooning that the Giants do.
He was really bad with the Cubs, right? Yeah. And that may not be because he wasn't platooning, but I'm sure he's aware of what his numbers were with the Cubs, and he may have believed he deserved a shot to be a regular. But one of two things could have happened. Either he realized, wow, I play much better when I'm platooned, and so I'm okay with that. Or he and his agents realized, you no longer have the leverage to claim this. You can go find somebody who's willing, maybe someone's willing to do that. But like last year, he was actually in a position where he could say, look, if you're going to platoon me, I'm not signing. Somebody will give me everyday plate appearances. I don't think he could rely on that anymore. So I don't think, whether or not he's come to terms with it, I don't think he had a choice. I don't think he was in a position to pick this time.
Fun fact, Jock Peterson had a higher WRC plus versus lefties last year, but that's more because he was particularly bad against his supposed strong side. It was 98 versus lefties and 93 versus righties.
How did that change when he got to Atlanta?
No, I don't have it broken down by team here.
They're trying to replace a lot, too, because not only did they lose Posey, but they're losing Chris Bryant as well. So the guy had an 823, talking about rough, OPS against righties, and obviously he murdered lefties. So as long as he just continues to come close to that, I have a hard time believing the Giants aren't just going to let him play as much as possible.
Yeah, what I had said when we did our corner infielder episode or outfielder episode, I don't remember which, I talked about Ruff in depth, and what I had said was like in his first stint when he raked, it was like, that's cool. He came back from Korea and was awesome. And then in his second season, which was last season, we were waiting for the other shoe to drop, but then he just kept doing it all year, and it's about time that we react accordingly.
Yeah, versus left-handed pitching last year, Ruff had a 166 WRC plus against right-handed pitching 126. It doesn't matter. He's just good.
It doesn't hurt. Of course, he has the dual eligibility as well. It's going to help a little bit. We didn't see as much of that in this draft that we did last year. And I think later on in drafts, that extra eligibility is a lot more valuable as you're trying to fill in for injuries. And that's what some of your bench spots usually are. This guys that you're not planning on playing unless you absolutely have to. So if you can have one guy that's eligible at 2 positions or 3 positions, that's going to go a long way.
Yeah, that was a courtesy to my fellow manager here in this league. So that way he could choose between a corner infielder and an outfielder with one of his picks as well. So
you guys are always thinking about each other. That's sweet.
Not always fondly, but yes.
I love to have options of where I'm going to mess up.
There you go. More opportunity. All right. Where did you mess up here, Chris, on pick 10 overall?
I messed up by picking someone who was going to get hurt 2 days later, because I had originally chosen Jose Barrero here. And unfortunately, he is now dealing with a hamate bone injury, which, as we mentioned before, could even sap his power once he gets back healthy from it, which will be a bummer. But I had a mulligan here, and I threw Barrero back into the pool and took Ramón Urías from the Baltimore Orioles. And Ramón is not exciting. He is perfectly cromulent. He is fine. He's going to give you a decent batting average. He's going to give you a decent OBP. Not a lot of power, not a lot of speed. But I think, and I may just be grasping at straws here, I think there's a little bit more juice in his bat than he has shown so far in his career. He's already got 1 home run in spring training. We all know how important spring training home runs are. But all right, the saying, lies, damn lies, and statistics, how statistics lie to you. That's a lie to you with statistics. Urías has the same hard hit percentage as guys like Xander Bogaerts, Michael Brantley, Carlos Correa, Trevor Story, Brandon Lowe. Same hard hit rate last year. So that means he's a slugger like those guys, right?
That's exactly what that means, yes.
That's exactly what that means. So he's got a decent max exit velo. And the example that I like to use most frequently when quoting max exit velo is Edmundo Sosa, who had like a 115 max exit velo or something stupid like that, except he did it once. And then the rest of his hits were like nowhere close to that. Urías actually had 28 hits over 105 exit velo, which is a good number of hits. That means there's like potential for barrels there. It's more of a launch angle thing than it is an exit velo thing. He's got enough oomph to get doubles and home runs. Just a matter of getting the ball in the air. So I do think there's some potential here for more power than he's shown before. And an issue is that he's in Baltimore and a righty. And if you haven't heard, they have moved the fences in left field back in Baltimore, which will likely hurt a player like Urías, who has middling power to begin with. But going back to what I said before, at worst, he's going to be boring for you. That moved back fence probably means more singles and doubles for him to left field in theory. And he should continue to just be a nice, solid player for you. And he's not going to carry your team, but he's great in a situation where, say, you've just lost Tatis in a really deep league and you need someone who's just not going to kill you. Urías can be that guy.
Yeah, he is penciled in right here is the everyday shortstop for the Orioles. And I think that we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. There's a lot of competition, I think, in that middle infield in Baltimore, whether you think Jorge Mateo is going to find a way into the lineup there every day. Of course, you got Urías, and you have Rooney Odor, who's competing as well. And they have at least one or two rookies coming up. Jemiah Jones made his appearance last year as well. I guess I'm curious to see if Urías holds on to an everyday role there, or if it becomes either a platoon or timeshare so that they can get more looks as some of the other options in the middle infield. So there's somebody definitely to keep an eye on. He does have dual eligibility on NFBC, which means he probably is eligible at 5 positions on Yahoo. So there's an option there as well.
So something that has been ingrained in me by one of our colleagues at Pitcher List, Scott Chu, is to always look at a player's rolling charts when I'm looking at a player. And Urías is like so consistent. He had a weak first 2 at-bats, hit a big peak, and then for the rest of the season just never ventured far away from average. Like he very barely dipped below average, very barely dipped above, but just stayed really consistently league average for most of the year. And I think that's what you're gunning for with him.
And there's value in that for sure. All right, we'll move on to pick 11 here overall. Kevin, representing on the wire here. What direction did you go for our team?
I went with the starting pitcher, and I didn't go with the guy who got hurt 2 days later, but I did go with the guy who the news that we finally heard some things today isn't quite as optimistic as what I had thought it was going to be. Yeah, with James Kaprielian, I knew he was going to be a couple weeks behind. Now today it's the last part of, let me look at the tweet here. Matt Kawahara, who is a beat writer for the Oakland Athletics for the San Francisco Chronicle, tweeted that he is scheduled to throw off a mound Friday and throw a first live BP on April 5th, so will not break camp with the A's. Kaprielian said today he's feeling good, but the A's won't rush building him up. So that's not what I wanted to hear. After thinking he was a couple of weeks behind was all we'd been hearing during the lockout when we didn't know what was going on with player injuries. So now this is a guy I would not be drafting, be keeping my eye on. It probably looks like early May, probably best case scenario before we see him. So I'll be watching him, but yeah, I'm not leaving him on my roster for the first month.
Yeah, it's rough because especially with the A's roster in general being in such flux, and I made a joke about this earlier. I can't believe that their entire starting 9 of the lineup is available in this draft, and not one of them ended up getting drafted by us here at post 350 ADP. But we did get a pitcher, and it just happened to be yeah. We ended up being Kaprielian.
If he was healthy, the appeal is there's a lot of similarities to Carlos Hernandez. Throws a lot of pitches, throws a couple of them pretty well. Just a step in the right direction with an additional one. He doesn't throw the curveball as often, about 8% of the time. If he, can step that up, if it's better, or just one pitch getting a little bit better, he's got a similar profile, not quite the velocity. Sits about 94 miles per hour, I believe, on his fastball, but a lot of similarities. Was the appeal if he was healthy?
I think that if they do move more of their players, especially in the rotation with the rumors between Montas and Manaya, well, obviously Bassett already moving over to the Mets, we're going to have a lot more opportunity to draft Oakland A players in this type of a mock draft. So I think that you could probably have dropped Kaprielian here and then picked up almost any other starter from the A's if you wanted to. Something to keep an eye out for. All right, we'll move down onto pick 12, back-to-back picks for keeper cut. Pete, you started us off. What direction did you go here with the first pick?
This is unexciting to me compared to Warren and compared to Bender, because I think Warren and Bender have real chances to get saves, whereas Loáisiga, I think if Chapman does go down or if he continues this downward trend that he showed last year, that certainly I think Loáisiga would be the next in line. But he's also not quite as exciting as those guys in terms of strikeouts, because he obviously relies on the sinker and he relies on contact. But if you look a little bit further and you look at his secondary pitches, he is really good at generating swings and misses. And as a Red Sox fan last year, he was like the last guy I wanted to see coming out of that bullpen to shut them down. And so at this point in the draft, particularly in deeper leagues, where obviously this is what we're talking about because we're talking about pick 350, I think he's a pretty safe stud back at the end of the Yankees bullpen. And he has to, I know Chad Green has been the next in line for a while, but I have to think if something does happen to Chapman, it will be Loáisiga that steps in. So it's a boom or bust play, but worst case scenario, I think you get one of the best eighth inning guys in baseball.
Yeah, I agree that Chad Green has been like that next man up there, but when he has been given the opportunity to go into that closer role for the Yankees, he's really hit or miss in that role. Chad Green's a very good reliever, unfortunately, as a fellow Red Sox fan. But when he is put in that pressure situation for like more than 2 times in a row, like he just doesn't do that well in general. You look at the outings that he's been in that situation. With Loáisiga, like he would really do well in the role. And the problem is that a good chunk of the times he goes out there, he is a more than 1 inning reliever. Like he's just the kind of guy that goes out there and he'll take on 2 innings a good chunk of the time that he's asked to. And you're looking through his play logs, he's gotten the saves that he got last year. At least he got 3, 4. I'm just looking through his game log.
Saves last year. So I was just looking. I was curious because Chapman led the team obviously with 30. Green was second with 6. Loáisiga third with 5. So he actually was third on the team in saves last year. I don't think he's that far from being in a position to do something, again, assuming something happens to Chapman, because as long as he's there, it's his job.
Yeah, and then 2 of those 5 saves came in situations where he went more than 1 full inning, either 1.1 or 2 full innings. So this is that they trust to clean up his own mess if he puts himself into a situation like that, or to finish things off after going out there in the 8th. As well. So that's a vote of confidence there.
Yeah, 70 innings last year. If he comes close to that again, even if he doesn't get saves, that's nothing to like sneeze at, particularly for a reliever. So if he does give you the same peripherals, maybe the strikeouts go up a little bit. That's just me hoping. And he gives you 70 innings. It's still a valuable piece, at least in roto leagues. I guess in a head-to-head league over 1 week, it's not going to matter that much, but those innings add up.
Yeah, we talked about the value of these type of relievers, especially in a roto league throughout the course of the season. They can be more valuable than a 9th starter if you're in that type of a league with that many pitching slots. All right, Chad, who are you really excited to talk about here at pick 13?
I am really excited to talk about Roansy Contreras, the Pirates' young starting pitcher. It's a little bit like my Melendez pick in that it's a guy who I'm not real confident is going to be on the roster opening day. In fact, I'll say the opposite. I'm very confident he won't be on the roster opening day, but I think he'll be up before too long. He's a weird situation because Contreras has all of 61 innings above A-ball. He threw 54 innings in 54.1 in AA, 3.2 in AAA, and 3 in the majors last year. That is the extent of what he's done above A-ball. So he isn't real seasoned at the upper minors, but they also pushed him all the way to the majors last year, gave him a start. He was brilliant in AA, and then I guess you would say brilliant in both AAA and the majors, but it's less than 7 total innings, so hard to read much into that. One of the things I did think that was interesting is recently there was a report in the Pittsburgh Tribune Review by Kevin Gorman talking about the relationship between Contreras and Jose Quintana. Quintana's locker room in spring training is next to Contreras's, and Derek Shelton, the Pirates manager, made a point of saying that the acquisitions of Quintana and catcher Roberto Perez were deliberate in terms of wanting to work with their young pitchers, Contreras in particular. And now, I don't think you don't move a guy up just because of that, but you also don't go out and make those kinds of acquisitions and say that a big part of it is shepherding your young pitching along and then banish that young pitching to AAA all year where he never gets to interact with Quintana or Perez. So I think he's going to be up, and his stuff, he got traded from New York to Pittsburgh. He pitched in 2019, then did nothing in 2020, and then reemerged in 2021. A little bit, again, like Melendez also had this big power breakout in 2021. For Contreras, it was velocity. He was up as high as 98. He settled in more like mid-90s up to 96. But that was new velocity for a guy who already had 2+ breaking pitches. And you take 2+ breaking pitches and you add upper 90s velocity to that, that's a good place to be. He's had a little bit of trouble against left-handed hitters, but he's also had such limited time in the high minors and with this new velocity that it's hard to know what to make of that. I think he has some seasoning to do, but I think if he goes to AAA, which he probably will, and if he dominates, which I think he will, I don't think the Pirates are going to leave him down very long. I think they're going to give him a shot, and we'll get to see him. We'll get to see him in the bigs before too long. In a league where you've got a nice deep bench and you can stash him, I would be willing to sit on him for a while. In a league with a shallower bench, you actually probably shouldn't draft him. He's a guy to watch and see when he gets called up. But if and when he's getting called up, I would act quickly because I think he has the potential to be a special pitcher, and pitching in that home park won't hurt either.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are forgetting, because it was almost 2 years ago now, that you don't know what most of these prospects were doing in 2020. Like, you just don't know what they were working on. There's no statistics. There's no game log. There's nothing. And so talking points about MJ Melendez and now Contreras are completely valid because they come out in 2021 with either new pitches or new velocity or something else, new power. And it's not completely surprising because you have to remember that they were doing stuff. Just because you didn't hear about it or didn't know about it or couldn't watch it doesn't mean they weren't doing anything. My follow-up question on Contreras is actually for Kevin. You talked about not willing to hold on to Kaprielian now that he's behind schedule and probably not going to start on time and what have you. But is Contreras somebody you'd rather hold on to, or is it the same situation? Is there more upside here to Contreras in his situation in Pittsburgh than you would say about situation in Oakland?
Yeah, for two reasons. One, I think there probably is more upside, and for two, it's more likely that someone else is going to draft him or pick him up if I don't. So if I want him, I probably need to try to stash him. So that's the difference there. Whereas Kaprielian should be available on many waiver wires for at least a couple of weeks.
And of course, I am up in that keeper cut league. And of course, I went to go see if Contreras was still available, and he was drafted 2 rounds prior. It will not be an option for me here, guys, unfortunately. All right, I ended up going with a starting pitcher as well. And I use starting pitchers in quotation because I think he only started 1 game last season, but he is expected to be a starting pitcher, at least for the foreseeable future. And that's Nate Pearson in Toronto. Not penciled in to the rotation at the moment, but looking very good in his most recent spring training outing. Velocity up on 2 different pitches and saying all the right things as far as what he wants his role to be moving forward. Obviously dealing with a lot of injuries last year, and talked about Nate Pearson a little bit last episode as well. So you can go back and listen to a little bit more in-depth conversation on him there. But what I like about Pearson is, again, he fits into the post-hype sleeper situation that we talked about earlier with other players, but that he still has the opportunity and the stuff, especially if he can really focus on his 2 secondary pitches and get the velocities up and using them a lot more consistently in a rotation piece to be as we said last week, undroppable, like a type of player that would be undroppable and not somebody you would want to be streaming in and out because somebody else is going to take the opportunity to pick him up and put them on their bench at the very least and see what they've got with him. Now, obviously the issue we have with Pearson in Toronto is that they went out and brought in new faces between Yusei Kikuchi, obviously signing Barrios for a longer contract. He still have Ryu, and Manoa made a huge step last year as well, and he's not going anywhere. And they brought in Gossman to basically replace Robbie Ray in that rotation. So he is fighting off like the likes of Ross Stripling for either the sixth man in the rotation and or a long relief. But I could totally see Toronto going with a six-man rotation moving forward. Now, we just got news today that they are going to allow teams to have an expanded roster going into throughout the month of April. So I'll be curious to see how that affects a lot of different teams and a lot of rotations, whether they decide to hold on to a couple extra pitchers into their bullpen and then maybe they don't have to go to a six-man rotation in many situations. But I think it would still behoove of Toronto to consider that, even with the expanded rosters. Is there anybody here that's either like they think that, well, show of hands on who thinks like Nate Pearson is beyond like the post-hype sleeper situation or post-hype prospect situation where they don't think he's going to make it back into a rotation anytime soon. And this is a terrible pick. I should have put him into my relief pitcher slot. Good. So it was a good pick because I see no hands. Oh, all right, Jordan. All right.
Just didn't want you to have a consensus up here.
Yeah.
just like ish. I am very gun shy. I feel like I was very gung ho and now I'm gun shy this year about taking risks later in drafts. I feel like I'd much rather go with like safer picks in a lot of cases. And I feel like there's just so many, you just named all of them. You just named all the hurdles that are in his way. I feel like with all these roadblocks, maybe I don't think Ross Stripling's going to really get in his way that much. And I think he might be able to make an occasional spot start, but I really think that he's bound for a long relief role in the bullpen and then maybe eventually just sticking there. I would love to be wrong. I know that Kevin said that earlier too. We love saying things like that. I hope I'm wrong about this because I really think that his stuff is great, but it's just, for me, it's the health is the biggest hurdle, along with all the starting pitchers that Toronto just signed.
Yeah, as he said in an interview, like the one thing he's got going for him going into this year is that he feels healthy. And of course, obviously with that outing that he just put up in spring training with his velocity being up, that is step one. There are things that you look at for in spring training and the things that you don't care about. And one of those things, though, that you should be paying attention to is velocity and obviously in walks, so in control. So for pitcher side, I'm not worried about too much how many strikeouts they're putting up, or sometimes I'm not even worried about how many home runs they're putting up. I'm looking at you, Andrew Heaney. But if you're walking guys in spring training where you have guys at the plate who are literally just trying to hit the ball to win a job and they're still walking, when you're still not giving them the opportunity to hit, that's a bad thing. Like you can't be doing that. And if the one thing that you need to work on is getting your velocity up to show that your health is there, that's something that is worth keeping an eye on. And he's got that. So that's at least one step in the right direction for that concern.
Andrew Heaney just gave up another home run, by the way.
While I was talking. Yeah. Not surprised. All right, Jordan, let's see. What direction did you go in here? We got 15th overall. We're a little bit more than halfway through this thing. What direction did you go here with your pick?
I was once again very courteous to my co-host Schwebzy by taking another person who is dual position eligible, which I thought was very nice of me. And that's Jorge Alfaro. We ended up slotting him into our catcher spot. And honestly, with Alfaro, like I realized just like any other draft, oh, wow, I didn't really draft any stolen bases. And Alfaro is a catcher who can actually chip in the stolen base front, which I think is a very interesting thing to find this late in the draft. Currently, I think he is projected to get around 350 plate appearances with the Padres because he's now in San Diego. Beyond the fact that he has like 82nd percentile sprint speed as a catcher who is 6'3" and 230 pounds, which is crazy to me still to this day. He hits the ball so hard all the time. He just does not elevate. He very frequently puts up max exit velocities of 115 or right around there pretty consistently over the course of his career. And like the biggest basket of balls that he hits are in the 105 range. So he hits the ball hard with frequency, he has one of the best hard hit rates in the league. It's just a matter of elevating the ball. And I think he could be, if he gets enough run, I think he could be like a 2010 bat. So this is my riskier pick, I think, here. It's obviously if he just continues to hit worm burners, then it's not going to be as fun. He might put up an okay average, but yeah, just upside here for me.
You know, we were talking about Jose Quintana being able to help out Roansy Contreras, and maybe it's like the opposite situation where they need to make sure that Alfaro and Eric Hosmer are nowhere near each other in the clubhouse. Don't introduce them. Don't let them talk to each other. Maybe that's why they're trying to trade Hosmer. They're like, look, everyone
they got a new one. They got a new one that hits it even harder.
Right.
The craters that he makes are even larger.
Turns out there's actually gold buried under Petco, and they're just trying to get at it. No, so I noticed today Derek Carty of the Bat and the Bat X fame today mentioned that one of the guys that he's been on this draft season has been Jorge Alfaro, and that made me think of you because I yelled at you. I raised my voice when you picked him because I'm so against it. Although I do appreciate you not making me pick a catcher from this group of catchers.
That's nice. Again, you picked a dual eligible player,
yes,
but you're still putting him in catcher. I can totally see Alfaro losing catcher eligibility for next year, just being on that San Diego roster and the catchers that they have coming up as prospects, plus the Victor Cantini and Austin Nola already being on the roster as well. He's third in line there, so he's going to get the majority of his playing time in the outfield. Probably, at least roster resource has him with a splitting time with Jers and Profar in left field, but he can move from probably left or right if necessary. I'll be curious to see how much playing time he actually finds in there. The fact that they didn't actually sign Save Suzuki, Tommy Pham is not re-signed there as well, gives him a little bit less of a roadblock as far as playing time goes. Yeah. But it is nice to have the eligibility at catcher while you still have it.
Kind of reminds me of Yandy Diaz if Yandy Diaz struck out a lot.
Low on base Yandy Diaz.
Yeah, just like tons of power. It just goes right into the dirt. I've always found him really interesting because of that sprint speed and the catcher eligibility, and I think it speaks to like how late we are in this draft where the catchers just run out. But I totally understand thinking if I can get 10 steals out of my catcher, that's a win at this point in the draft.
Yeah, honestly, it's a thing for me where if I need stolen bases a little bit more, I'm going to take Alfaro. If I need average, I'm actually going to take Austin Nola. I don't know where he is. If he was in like post 350 range, he might have been just inside. But I feel like Austin Nola is the type of guy who puts up a solid average every year, and people underappreciate him.
I liked it better when Austin Nola had like triple eligibility between catcher, first, and second. And that was nice. Sick. I like Alfaro's pick here. If you're in a 2-catcher, 15-team daily moves league where you can put him into that position when he's playing and maybe get something out of it, which that's a very deep league. That's what we're talking about. So maybe it fits. All right, Chris, your partner here gave you every opportunity to make all the different decisions with the eligibility. So which direction did you go here with pick 16?
In contrast to my co-host, I took a good hitter. So I took...
Okay. Are you frozen? George frozen? No,
just staring at me. Just staring me down.
just shooting daggers directly into Schwebzy's face through a computer screen.
So similar to JD Davis, I looked at Garrett Cooper's batting average and I was like, really? Wow. Garrett Cooper over the last 3 seasons totaling 804 plate appearances, partially because of injury, partially because of the COVID season. He has a 282 average over the last 3 seasons. And I don't think people realize that because he's been injured, because he's been in the not really baseball relevant Miami team for the last few years. But in that same time frame, roughly say a season and a third, he's also got 30 home runs, 200 plus runs plus RBI, and really like perfectly good walk and strikeout numbers. Like he's a legitimately good bat. And don't look now, but even after signing Jorge Soler, even after the Marlins signed Soler, Roster Resource has Garrett Cooper as the number 3 hitter and not platooned, which if that were to actually occur and if he plays there every day, that is going to be a gold mine of runs and RBI. Probably not a ton of home runs, maybe 25 over a full season, but decent batting average. I'm sorry. I'm trying to think to make sure that I'm not going to regret this later. I think every single 3 and 4 hitter in the MLB should be rostered.
I think that's a safe chance statement to make on the fly. That and leadoff hitters, like regardless of how bad you think the player is, if he's leading off, he will give you something valuable. And so 3-4 hitters, regardless of how bad the team is, you're going to be put in more opportunities than most to produce.
As a fan of the Cleveland Guardians, I did pull up our lineup real quick to make sure I agree with that. And I do. They've got Jose Ramirez hitting third and Franmil Reyes hitting fourth. Now, part of that is Ramirez should be hitting second. And if you have him second and Franmil fourth, then I'm not entirely sure that their third hitter would be worth rostering. But
who
I don't
hits
even
fourth
know who
then?
it would be.
Owen Miller, Yu Chang.
Right now, their lineup is Miles Straw, Ahmed Rosario, Jose Ramirez, Franmil Reyes. And then you got Bobby Bradley.
Oh, no.
Stephen Kwan, Andres Jimenez, Austin Hedges, and Bradley Zimmer to round it out.
Really, I have poor lineup construction to thank for my statement being true, and I'm okay with that.
If they moved Ramirez to the 2 slot, then your statement would be false because somebody else would have to take one of those spots, and it would be very sad.
So I was slightly worried about Cooper after the Soler signing because I had it in my head that Brian De La Cruz would be a fixture in center field because I couldn't imagine Soler or Jesus Sanchez playing center field, but Roster Resource currently has Sanchez as the center fielder. I did not think that was in his skill set, but I guess we'll have to see. Maybe the bat is so good that they'll throw him out there in center field, even with poor defense, kind of like Brandon Nimmo circa a couple of years ago before he decided to get good at defense. The bat plays. Really, we talked about Cooper on our outfield episode, and at the end of the day with him, if he plays every day, he should be rostered in not even just deep leagues. I think it's a stretch to call him like 12 team 3 outfield relevant. He's not a top 30 outfielder, but if you go to 12 team 5 outfielders, probably.
Yeah, I had an auto new auction last night that Pete was in as well, actually. And in a league where I already have a bunch of first base outfield eligible guys, I ended up picking up Cooper because he was $4, and I was like, this is stupid. Why are people bidding $4? I'll just take him. And I'm not even sure where he fits in my lineup, but he's too good a bat to be sitting on the wire to even be this low paid, I think.
I did the exact same thing in my auto new league. We had our draft 2 days ago, Sunday, and I got him for $2 because just no one else wanted to bid on him.
$2, man, I'm jealous.
It's just a good value. I don't know why people aren't jumping on that, but yeah,
I was super happy with him at 4.
Not to.
If Roster Resource holds up, then he's going to have Jorge Soler's 11% walk rate right in front of him. So there's going to be plenty of opportunities to rack up RBI this year.
In spite of that ballpark, with that lineup that they have posted on Roster Resource, there's, in spite of the ballpark, going to be a lot of home runs in Miami this season.
Like 1 through 7, it's really Jacob Stallings and Miguel Rojas are pretty decent for 8 and 9 hole hitters. It's really they've built a half decent lineup there.
You literally had to squint. Yeah. You're like,
that's just how Schwebzy looks most of the time.
No, I smile. My eyes immediately squint when I smile. So I was happy looking at the lineup.
Yes, there it is.
Okay, yeah.
So happy to see Jacob Stallings in a prominent lineup spot.
All right, the next pick here, Kevin, you did me the honor of taking our catcher, so I wouldn't have to either. So I appreciate that as well. So shout out for that. Who'd you go with pick 17 here?
I went with Tucker Barnhart. As has been stated throughout the show, this was the last catcher taken in this draft. So we did get the last guy remaining standing. Detroit brought Barnhart in to mentor this young pitching staff and the guys they have coming up. So he's going to play. And I think he'll probably get a little more playing time than the projections state. They have him in the high 300s, close to 400 plate appearances. And then they have Haas getting close to 300. I think Barnhart being a switch hitter, it's not going to be a straight platoon. I think he's going to be close to a full-time player, as close as we see for most teams these days at the catcher position. So I think we'll see more along the lines of his 2016, 2017, when he was getting roughly 420 plate appearances. The other thing is, with the projections, it really appears they all are taking a lot of stock, and it was 110 plate appearances in 2020 with his batting average. He's got a 248 career batting average. He's hit at least 231 every season other than 2020 and his 60 plate appearance rookie year way back in 2014. So I think he'll hit better than the mid 220s that he's projected at. The 247 he hit last season or 248 he's hit for his career are in play. And with a few more plate appearances, we're looking at double-digit home runs as well. So I don't think this is a zero here. I think in a 15-team, two-catcher league or even 12-team, two-catcher league, I'd be perfectly okay with Barnhart as my second catcher.
Yeah, this is from when I saw you make the pick, I knew it was completely a plate appearance hope. And the more he can get plate appearances, the more he can at least add up the counting stats. And maybe the problem is that you always say, oh, then the average won't hurt you. But the more plate appearances you have, the more the average does end up hurting you in a roto league. I guess I'm just a little worried looking at their roster that they have Dustin Garneau and Eric Haas on the bench as their backup catcher or catcher, people who can play the catcher position at least, and they're out of options. They're not going anywhere unless they're either cut or traded away. Obviously, Haas is going to play some time in the outfield, but the Detroit outfield is not exactly clogged, but it's getting there. They've got obviously Victor Reyes, who they want to continue to see what they can get out of him. Riley Green is coming up. Badu, as much as he was in a platoon before, I could see him being in less of a platoon going into this year. And obviously Robbie Grossman's going to be playing all the time as he's getting paid. So I'm not sure how much time they're going to get Haas in there as well. He forced the issue during the season last year, but he went downhill pretty quick toward the end of the year. I guess I'm a little bit more worried about Barnhart getting the type of plate appearances that you are more confident in than you are. I hope I'm wrong. I want to make sure I get my opportunity to say that in there as well. As you picked him, he's on our little mock draft team here, but I guess that would be my concern about Barnhart, in conjunction with the fact that he is a defensive catcher. He is a framer. He is a guy who's going to help that pitching staff, and he's not there necessarily for the bat specifically. And we'll see how he ends up doing in Detroit. All right, when we move on to Pete, you have the first of these two keeper cut picks here. You ended up going in a similar direction as me in the middle infield. So why don't you talk about your selection here at pick 18?
Yeah, I was pretty excited to make this pick. Adam, have you guys had on Chris Welsh at all on The Wire?
No, we had his partner. We had Scott Bogman, but Welsh has yet to make an appearance here.
Yeah, so Chris Welsh is awesome. So you can follow him at Is It the Welsh. I mean, he's most known for his work at RotoWire in this league podcast, which your listeners obviously know because you had his partner on. But if you search his handle, which is, again, Is It the Welsh, and the word Stott for Bryson Stott, you will see a love fest for Bryson Stott. And that's really what turned me on to him. And it's important I take this with some context, where the Arizona Fall League was obviously very hitter friendly. There was some pretty bad pitching in the Arizona Fall League this year, but Bryson Stott, at least to the Welsh, who's great with prospects, according to him, he called him the most impressive bat in the Arizona Fall League. He had a 318, 445, 49 slash line with 10 extra base hits, 31 RBI in just 26 games. And as much as I like Stott, and I do, and he's been moving up draft boards, and he's 24 years old, like he's ready to dive into the major leagues. This is also as much about the moves that the Phillies have made and the defense of Didi Gregorius last year and the offense of Didi Gregorius last year, and really just everything about Didi Gregorius, who last year at the plate, a 68 WRC plus, a StatCast page that I don't know if he was swinging a pool noodle last year, but it was ugly. And out of 36 qualified shortstops for outs against average, which it has its issues, but I like it, especially for shortstops and outfielders. He was 36th out of 36 eligible shortstops in outs against, and it was bad. He was a -17. The next closest were Gleyber Torres and Xander Bogaerts, who won't move off of shortstop, with -9. Didi was atrocious, and with their fielding being so bad, like Schwarber or Castellanos, Chad and I were just talking about this, like one of them is going to have to be in the field, and it's not looking like it's going to be a very good fielding team. You can't have your shortstop being the worst fielding shortstop in baseball, and I think Stott offers a pretty substantial upgrade there that they may just have to do between how bad Didi is at the plate and how bad he is in the field.
Yeah, and it was Dave Dombrowski was pretty clear early in the offseason that Stott was going to get the opportunity to win that shortstop job in Philadelphia. And this was before they made any moves, before anything else. Basically, they're not happy with Gregorius's play, whether it be on the field or with the bat. And obviously, Gregorius dealt with his own injury issues last year as well, announcing he had a form of gout, which I have, and it's not happy. You're not a happy person when you have it, but obviously he dealt with it and he got through it. But I've been holding on to that one statement from Dombrowski all offseason that Stott was going to basically have every opportunity to win that job. And you don't say that early in the offseason about somebody who has not made an appearance in the majors and you have a clear shortstop ahead of him on the roster who's not going anywhere if you're not extremely comfortable with him actually winning the job.
It was the biggest shortstop market ever, and the Phillies spent a ton of money and went over the luxury tax threshold, and I don't think they were linked to any of these shortstops, which I think, to your point, really speaks to the confidence that the team must have, because I don't know if any team has a bigger need at shortstop than the Phillies. Yankees fans might be groaning, but it is what it is.
I would be remiss while we're talking about Bryson Stott if I didn't bring up the fact that a dear friend of the In the Deep podcast, Ellen Adair, who we had on a month and a half ago at this point, I can't remember exactly when, implanted in our consciousness the fact that Bryson Stott was next in line and likely to be a good person to keep an eye on come draft season. So shout out Ellen for doing that.
Yeah, definitely somebody everybody should be keeping an eye on in those leagues where you can draft non-major leaguers early on and hold on to it, because you're going to know really early whether or not he is somebody you're going to hold on to. If he doesn't win the job, maybe he's worth dropping and you're not sure, but he's going to win the job, then he's on your roster. You're not dropping him until he forces your hand by not producing. All right, Chad, in my mind with this pick, you had a lot of options, as we alluded to earlier in the pod, and you went with a reliever in the San Diego bullpen. And if you're looking at roster resources page there, I think there are 17 pitchers listed as closer for the Padres. So which of those guys did you end up going with, and why?
It's while I appreciate the 17 exaggeration, it's actually 6, which is still ridiculous. Like we were talking about before, the Reds have 4 guys listed as closer. The Padres have 6. And by the way, that 6 does not include Drew Pomerantz, who is injured, but who Dennis Lin, who is a great follow if you're interested in stuff going on with the Padres, had said earlier in the offseason was likely to get the first shot at the closer gig if he was healthy. Now he's not, but they've just got a ton of guys. The guy I picked is Pierce Johnson. Johnson is, so comparing him to the 2 early picks in this draft, Art Warren and Anthony Bender, he's not as exciting as them. I think those guys are more interesting if they're not closers than Johnson is. Johnson gets plenty of strikeouts. He's been over 30% K rate, 12.15 K per 9, 11.81 K per 9 the last 2 years. But he also walks a bunch of guys. And so he's not one of these closers or relievers who's putting up like a mid-2s ERA. He's going to be more like 3 to 3.5 instead of 2 to 2.5, something like that. However, he's been very successful. Over the last 2 years, he does have a 3.09 ERA, a 3.26 FIP. He's striking out almost 12 hitters per 9 innings. And I think he's got as good a shot at anyone as having that closer job. He's also a unique guy in that he throws about 2/3 curveballs and the rest of his pitches are fastballs. And so, I don't know, I think that's fun. He's got a 96 mile per hour fastball and he's, I'm going to keep throwing this curveball because he's got 93rd percentile spin on that curveball. It's a nasty curve. And I don't know. I find him fun. I think of all the guys in that pen, the only other one who might be as intriguing as him is Dinelson Lamet, just because we know the arm talent there. I don't think they're going to install Lamet as the closer right away. I think he might earn his way there, but I think Johnson I'm betting on Johnson to get the first shot. The nice thing about this pick, if you do make this late in drafts, is by opening day, you'll probably know if it was worth it or not. And if it's not, you move on. You're going to need to drop somebody for your early fab pickups anyways. After you listen to Kevin and Adam tell you who you should be picking up that first week, you can get rid of Pierce Johnson if you need to. But if he has that job, I think he's good enough to keep it. I think we talked a little bit before about Dylan Floro having the job in Miami unless he loses it. No one's going to take it away from him. And I feel like Johnson could get himself into that position as well, where he doesn't have to be brilliant. He just has to be a solid closer. And if he gets the first shot and he's solid, I think he sticks in that role until he's not solid. And I don't think that's coming anytime soon. So you're talking about a guy who you can get this late who I think legitimately could get you 30 saves. Like, I think 30 saves is not a crazy thing to predict if he gets the job. And again, if he doesn't get the job, you'll just pick up someone else anyways. Possibly whoever does get the job, since there's so many guys to pick from.
Yeah, I'm tempted to just throw out, hey, let's do a new mock draft. There's 6 of us. There's 6 closer options on roster research for the Padres. Let's go around the room and everybody pick one and see who I get stuck with. I'm not going to do that. That doesn't make for good radio. But yeah, I took a lot more chances on Emilio Pagan in my late draft and holds. I'm talking like rounds like 45, 46, 50 rounds than I did with Pierce Johnson, just because to your point, there's so many options. Now, in a fab league, Johnson's probably at the top of the heap, and just based on all the things that you said, Chad, but in a draft and hold, it's so difficult to use a roster spot in a situation like this.
In a draft and hold, you're betting on who's going to get the most saves. In a fab league, you're betting on who's going to get the first saves. And that's the thing, is I don't actually care right now who's going to have the most saves in the Padres. What I care right now is who's going to get the most saves between April 7th and April 20th. Mm-hmm. And if he gets the most saves in that 2-week window and then loses the job, fine, I'll move on to someone else. But what I don't want to do here is bet. Like, I don't want to get myself in a position where I'm saying, I think Pierce Johnson's going to lead the team in saves. And if he doesn't get the first couple shots, be like, I still think he's going to lead the team. And all of a sudden it's like June, July, and I've got this guy on my roster who's not the closer because I really believe he's going to eventually get that job. Like, you don't want to be in that position. Bet on the guy you think is going to get it now. And if you're wrong, just move on.
All right, we will move on to my next pick, who I ended up staying with the reliever. We have 2 roster spots open. I decided to let Kevin fill the corner infield spot, and I went with our second and final relief pitcher option as well. I ended up going with Daniel Hudson, supposedly the second closer or setup man for the Dodgers, as Kenley Jansen signs with Atlanta. And with Dave Roberts recently stating that he's not necessarily going to go with one person in the closer role, I do believe that Daniel Hudson and Blake Trinan will get almost all of the situations at the end of games, if for no other reason. Monetarily speaking, it makes less sense to provide Brusdar Gatterall and anybody else, any of the other young pieces of that bullpen, with more opportunity to increase their arbitration cases in future years by giving them saves. That being said, obviously Trinan and Hudson have the most closing experience. They will be, in most people's minds, the top 2 options there. I'm also remembering when Daniel Hudson was the choice of the World Series champion Washington Nationals and not anybody else. So these are during the playoffs. So there's going to be some kind of self-confidence that he brings, even with his more recent outings not being that great, and the opportunity, or not the opportunity, but and the expectation that Blake Trinan just did so well in the setup role, in a fireman's role, that they're going to have a lot more confidence putting him into those situations and not necessarily holding him for the 9th inning. This is really more of a vote of confidence, not so much for Daniel Hudson, but I'm less confident in Blake Trinan as being a high draft pick for a closer situation for those who are really stretching for saves early on in their drafts. And I'd rather take the chance on Hudson stealing away a bunch of saves later on. As the adage goes, why take one guy when you can take him another guy 100 picks later? And Hudson literally is that guy to Blake Trinan.
I was just thinking, in NL only leagues this year, how many reliable closers are there? Like 3?
Yep.
Jansen, Hader, Diaz, Gallegos. Is that the whole list?
Yeah, and Jansen just took over for one of them that was supposedly a reliable one.
I just realized where I'm going to be spending all my money in my NL only draft coming up.
Yeah, I was going to add,
depending how you
Knibble,
define reliable, I think Melanson belongs in that category too. Melanson's got the job, right?
They did just sign Ian Kennedy.
Yeah.
He had 30 saves last year.
No, I'm laughing just because it's okay.
I guess
I'm wrong.
Ian Kennedy signed a minor league deal with the Rangers, and he had 30 some odd saves with them. So he finds a way somehow. But you can say the same thing about Melanson. It's like, why is Melanson getting all these saves year after year?
No, that's what I was laughing at. Is you've already got Melanson. Why'd you sign him again? Like what? But here we are.
They would have signed Alex Colomé, but he ended up signing with, of all places, the Rockies. So they could have had 3.
It's like the mom, we already have a closer at home thing, except they're both the store brand.
Kirkland, Melanson.
My question with Daniel Hudson, though, is do you think that Brusdar Graterol gets any opportunities before he does?
Well, that's the thing. He's still in that arbitration. So that's my concern about all these young guys in bullpens, is that why they don't get chances right away is all monetary. And I don't see Graterol and I'm blanking on Vesia having options at the end of games, just because saves are still a thing that they argue about in arbitration hearings. It's still a stat that matters for whatever reason they do. And they have control over when these guys go into the game just by the nature of their job. And I can see them not doing that. Plus Alex Vesia is a lefty, so it wouldn't necessarily be the first choice there as well. Graterol has his mystery pitch, though, that I'm curious to see what it actually is.
Same.
I love that. Like, guys talking about how they're working on a new pitch, but they won't tell anybody what it is. It reminds me of the Jim Carrey's character on The Office, where he's, I have all these ideas, but I'm not going to tell you what any of them are.
So not to be all Office nerd on you, but that was actually Will Arnett.
Yes, it was.
I'm gonna
mute
my mic now. And
I knew it, and I'm like, somebody call me out on this. I hope, because I don't want to correct myself. I'm glad you corrected me. Thank you.
it was Will Arnett.
Actually,
Yes.
Full confession right now, I've only watched, I think, probably like 7 total episodes of The Office in my life. It's like the exact opposite. I feel like I'm very much in the minority on that.
Missing out?
Yeah. Jim Carrey was the one that went to the Finger Lakes all the time, right? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you. All right, Jordan, why don't you talk about something besides The Office with your pick here at pick 21?
Personally, I think it would be hilarious if I talked about The Office because I know nothing about it. But instead, I'll talk about Nick Lodolo. So honestly, this is mostly just based off feel after his debut last week. I think Friday he pitched the opening game for the Reds. Like every pitcher for the Reds, it's a less than stellar home park, obviously, and there was some injury risk. He was dealing with a lot of blister issues last year and also a shoulder issue near the end of the year, which is a bit concerning, but he's healthy now. And I think that Lodolo is in the running for that final roster spot. I think right now they have Tony Santillan slotted in as the 5th starter on roster resource. But he looked really good, Lodolo. That is, in his debut, he struck out 4 over 2 innings. He doesn't have a super dominant repertoire, isn't really known for that, but his command is very good. And when you're pitching in a place like Cincinnati, not giving up a ton of walks means that when you do eventually give up a dinger here or there, it's not going to deal as much damage as it would. So if you have that command, I think it's going to help him out a bit. It's basically, to me, between him and Hunter Green for who gets that final starting rotation spot, probably. Him and then, what is it? Is it Brandon Williamson is the one they got from Seattle in that trade?
Yeah, but I don't think he's as close to knocking on the door.
Yeah. Funny enough, actually, Brandon Williamson and Nick Lodolo were teammates at TCU. So it was a nice little reunion. They actually lived together during the offseason, most off seasons. So that was a nice little reunion. But yeah, so I think it's between Lodolo and Green for that last rotation spot. Again, obviously the biggest question mark is going to be the health stuff, if he can stay healthy. Also, he isn't like a dominant velo guy by any means. If you can see an uptick there, I think his stock's going to go way, way up. He's usually around like low 90s, maybe like topping out like mid 90s. But at like pick 489, you're not really going to be that worried about not getting the upside here. This is, again, someone that you're going to draft. He doesn't have that rotation spot on opening day. You can just send him back to the wire and pick someone else up.
I love Lodolo, and mostly for my time in my dynasty leagues, sniped on him in more than one draft, and I was very upset about it. I can see Lodolo being somebody that you actually don't want to drop early on, even if he doesn't make the rotation, just because he's going to get the call up this year. And I have there's every indication that he's going to be very good. Granted, he's in Cincinnati, not the ballpark you want to see him pitching in, but just everything you've seen, everything you talked about, Jordan, and then everything, if you watched any of his minor league starts, he's just very in control of what's going on the mound at all times, it seems. So I'm a big fan here. I don't think I would be dropping him early on unless I'd probably be willing to hold on to him for at least the month of April to see if he does get the call back later on after the 3-week service time manipulation period, or even possibly into May. But we'll see what the Reds end up doing with him.
Yeah, full disclosure, he was going to be my pick because we still needed a starting pitcher, and that was a snipe.
Hey, I'll take it.
One of my favorite ongoing bits in the Pitcher List Discord server is that every time someone brings up Nick Lodolo, every prospect guy flies off the handle because he got left off of a really prominent prospect guy's top 100 prospect list, and everyone just loses their minds.
All right, you filled in the last spot for you guys in the deep, and you had to find a relief pitcher, and you technically did. He's been a relief pitcher. So why'd you go with this pick here?
So I have already lied to you folks, and now I am going to cheat my fellow colleagues here. I went with Nick Lodolo. No, Michael Lorenzen now he's on the Los Angeles Angels, former Cincinnati Red. And I want to take you guys back a little bit to the year 2020, the COVID season. And it's September 15th, and Michael Lorenzen has just been promoted to the starting rotation for the first time in a while. And he got 3 starts. He pitched 13 innings. He struck out 18 batters. He put up a 2.77 ERA and paired that with a 1.35 FIP. He was awesome. Michael Lorenzen has long been a reliever that looks like he should be able to start, as he has not a 6-pitch repertoire. He has literally too many pitches to fit onto a player in MLB The Show. And I want to say 4 of them are good. He hasn't gotten good results on his sinker or cutter historically, but he's got premium velo. He's got breakers that seem to do their job. I have this sorted to the 2020 season, but he gets good whiff rates on both his slider and his changeup. His curveball has gotten results historically. It seems like he has the repertoire to make things work. And he is currently, per roster resource. How many times do you think we've said roster resource today, guys? But he's currently slotted in as the number 4 starter for the Los Angeles Angels. Now, I don't really trust that beyond the 3rd starter. I think beyond Ohtani, Syndergaard, and Sandoval, anything can happen. And honestly, with Ohtani, Syndergaard, and Sandoval, if any or all 3 of them got hurt, I would be zero surprised. So really, that entire rotation could, who knows what's going to happen a few months from now. But as of right now, he's slotted in as the number 4 starter. So I have a feeling that he signed, and when he was trying to sign with a team, he was like, I want to be a starter. And LA was willing to grant him that wish. So here he is. He's 30 and being given the chance to start full time. Him and Syndergaard are shirtless gym bros. Google the pictures. It's wild to see one of those guys make the other look small. But yeah, I like where Lorenzen is. I like that he's getting an opportunity. And I don't think there's much of a threat to his spot if he's pitching. The only guy threatening to enter that rotation is really Reed Detmers. And I think Jose Suarez or Jamie Barria would be kicked out of the rotation first. So, yeah, again, not a true reliever, but he is relief pitcher eligible. And if you've been in deep leagues before, that dual starting and relief eligibility can be really good depending on league format.
The SPARP value is a real thing.
Love SPARP.
Yeah. Good old SPARPs. No, Lorenzen came out right after the signing, and he was very clear that is exactly why he ended up going with the Angels, is that they all but guaranteed him a shot at the rotation. And more recently, he's come out and said that, I'm in the rotation. They've told me as such. And so I think that's a safe play there. because nobody's come out to retort it as well. And I think Joe Madden even said that, yeah, he expects to see him in the rotation to start the season as well. To your point, who's to say what's going to happen to the rotation 2 or 3 months from now? But at least to start the season, you know what his role is going to be.
Yeah, the rotation looks good right now, but it could be utter chaos. There's the makings of a really good 5-man rotation here with Ohtani, Syndergaard, Sandoval, Lorenzen, and Detmers. But if that's actually the rotation in September, I'd be shocked.
I'd be curious to see if he actually put in his contract that he has to also DH for himself, just like Ohtani. I know he does. I know he wants to play the outfield. I know he wants to hit. And so, of course, he goes to the Angels in that scenario.
It's the new market inefficiency.
There you go. All right, Kevin, how'd you close out our corner? I know you were talking about somebody else, and you didn't go with that player. You're talking about going with Miranda over in Minnesota. You did not pick Miranda for our corner. You went with someone else. Tell me why you pivoted there.
It was the Correa signing. It was that simple. Got more crowded in Minnesota. So I pivoted and threw a dart that I do not think will even hit the wall next to the dartboard. But there's a chance. And I'm not taking this chance in draft and hold leads. I won't touch this guy. But in fab leagues, it's worth a shot on Keston Hiura here late in a draft. Because if things go well throughout spring training and the first week of the season, it's going to cost a lot of fab to acquire him for your rosters. So take the chance now and see what happens. It's, I was one of the guys, I was drafting him in the second round in 2020, coming off his 2019 of 38 home runs and 16 stolen bases across AAA and MLB, hitting well over 300 combined and over 300 at MLB in spite of that 30.7% strikeout rate. Unfortunately, he hasn't sniffed anything as good as a 30.7% strikeout rate since then. And we were warned this was coming. People that were watching him play were telling us that he has trouble with the high fastball. He only had 2 games played at the end of the season at the major league level last season after the crackdown on the sticky stuff. And other players, Kyle Schwarber being one, notably throughout the years that we have, when they've dropped off in contact ability, we've been told everybody figured out they can't hit the high fastball. When they cracked down on sticky stuff last year, even though the spin kind of bounced back right away, the guys that notoriously had trouble hitting high fastballs continued to perform better. So I don't know if pitchers weren't trying to go high in the zone as often with those 4-seamers, but we didn't get to see if Hiura was going to improve the same that some of these other players did. And I want to see that. If he does, he's not going to hit 300 because he's not going to have a 400 BABIP again. But if we're looking at 240, even 250, the talent was there. We saw it in 2019. So I'm taking a shot here. I don't think it's great odds that it works out, but there are avenues to where it is possible.
So I will jump in here as the resident Milwaukee Brewers fan. The one encouraging thing about Hiura is that there was a slight swing change, a little bit more of, or a less pronounced toe tap, more so on his prep for a swing. And he did hit a tank off of Chris Paddock on a high fastball. Incredibly anecdotal, but it was at least something encouraging to see from him. And he has been hitting pretty well. He does have, I think, over 7 plate appearances. He does still have 2 strikeouts, but he has 3 hits, including a home run, 4 RBIs so far in spring training. So there's at least steps being taken, and like you can see actual changes in his approach, which are really encouraging. So I hope you're wrong, Kevin. I hope that he actually can do something nice, and people are like clamoring over him once that first fab period starts to run. But I am tempering my expectations based off of what happened the past 2 years for sure.
Hiura hitting a dinger off of Paddock is like the proverbial unstoppable force in the immovable object.
Post-hype versus post-hype. That's awesome. Pete, you ended this draft with a guy that has actually been getting a lot of talk recently. Who was your Mr. Irrelevant for our post 350 ADP draft?
Yeah, I feel like the Mr. Irrelevant for this draft is you must be as obscure as it gets. But I'm actually excited about Mitch Keller. I just took him in a draft last night. I was reading up about him, and obviously we all saw the viral bullpen session that he threw where apparently he hit 102 miles an hour or something like that, which was really exciting. So in 2019, when he made his debut, on the surface, it looked like a disaster because the ERA was up over 7, and it's easy to just pile on and a pirate. It's another busted prospect, whatever. If you looked at the underlying numbers, though, the expected ERA, the FIP, the XFIP, all of them are really good that year. It was only over 48 innings, but I think it was that first impression that really turned people off. And it was so bad that I guess he felt like he needed to adjust. And so he shortened up his delivery a little bit. He put a little bit of a hitch in his arm. And we've seen that work with guys in the past where it at least helps with more consistent delivery and more control, but it took away from his velocity. He abandoned that. And apparently he's now doing things like whatever the Kikuchi drill is, which is actually named after Yusei Kikuchi, but it's just like a drill to feel out your lower body. And he's been doing different things to ignite his delivery and elongate it again. And that coincided with this massive increase in his velocity. And the bullpen catcher that caught that bullpen session was like blown away. And it's just a former top prospect who all of a sudden has regained some of that glamour and hype that he had before because he went back to what he was doing when he was this highly regarded prospect. So I'm hoping the changes kind of stick and we get a little bit of a Mitch Keller breakout. And I don't think there's any question the leash is going to be super long for him this year.
I just want to point out that 2021's Mr. Irrelevant, picked by, you may know him, Jordan White, was Emmanuel Clase. So you got a high bar to clear here.
Did you guys do well in the draft last year? I can't remember.
You know, I didn't want to talk about it, but I think, yeah.
You held that one pretty strong, Chris.
One of the things with Keller that I think is interesting is when he made those adjustments last time, there was a lot of talk about, oh, these are adjustments that are going to help put him over the top. He's going to be able to put everything together now. And clearly that wasn't the case, at least not immediately. And it's a good reminder that development, like we talk a lot of times about development not being linear. Development's not only not linear, it is very hard to predict. Like when you hear that somebody has a swing change or has reworked their mechanics or something like that, like it's exciting and it's interesting and you want to see what it does, but sometimes it makes them worse. And so like you have to wait and see how things play out. And so it's interesting that he's going back to what worked for him before. It sounds like maybe a modified version of what worked for him before. And hopefully that works out for him.
All right, we'll see if that Mr. Irrelevant pick works out better than Class A, but here's hoping for you guys on that case. So you can be the ones to shove it into all of our faces next year when we do this again. But I think that's going to do it for us. We've been doing this long enough, and I think we're all done. And I know that my wife wants to go to bed, so I need to get out of here. So
this was like the Batman of podcasts.
Thank you guys for joining us anyway. Jordan, Chris, do you guys have anything specific working for your next In the Deep?
So our next episode is going to be relief pitchers and catchers post 350. So it's going to be a lot like this. So we'll get to talk about more of the catchers that we didn't mention tonight besides just Jorge Alfaro. But yeah, we've been doing post 350 podcast the entire preseason. So once that wraps up, then we'll be getting into our kind of similar to what y'all do. We're going to be talking about folks that are going to be sub 20% rostered in most leagues. So yeah.
Awesome. And then Chad P, what's on the docket for Keeper Cut in the next week or two?
So we just yesterday released an episode where we reacted to some of the signings and trades and stuff that's gone on, injuries in spring training. It's nice to have actual news to respond to. So we were able to respond to some of that and look at some of the keeper and long-term implications for that stuff. I think we're going to do a little bit more of the same coming up. And I imagine that our next episode will be the Pete reacts to the Trevor Story signing for an hour episode.
I was actually going to say that. Yeah. Our next episode.
It's just going to be an hour of Pete talking about how awesome Trevor Story is, how excited he is about Trevor Story, how wonderful Trevor Story is. And maybe we'll mention some other players too.
I'm going to work in so many story puns. It's going to be nauseating.
Fantasy team name for you this year, the Trevor Ending Story.
Wow. Well done.
There you go.
Well done.
Top of his head. Hasn't been thinking about that at all. Well, that's going to wrap it up for episode 52 of On the Wire. Please make sure to subscribe, share, and review the podcast wherever you're listening. And we will be back next week with our first Fab breakdown of the 2022 season. And of course, keep a lookout for Kevin's companion article over at pitcherlist.com. It comes out every Sunday afternoon. Also, keep a lookout for new episodes every day across the Pitcher List Fantasy Baseball podcast feed and the Pitcher List General Baseball podcast feed wherever you listen to your podcast. You can follow myself on the Twitter at 80grade. That's all spelled out. Kevin is at Hasting Kevin. Once again, thanks to our guest from In the Deep at In the Deep PL, and Keep or Cut at Keep or Cut, cut with a K. And on behalf of Kevin Hasting, I am Adam Howe, and with that, we bid you goodbye.